I was introduced to Harry Manhoff by his son Aton, who owns Cape and CowlComics. And it was a really great story that I wanted to share with you. Harry is a rabbi who has been using comics as part of his instruction in synagogues, as well as an adjunct professor. And we got the chance to talk about DC Comics, great comic writers like Will Eisner and Art Spiegelman. And because of that, we had a chance to cover a lot of great themes and topics, and it's my pleasure to share them with you. Thanks for joining me for a really great conversation with Rabbi Harry Manhoff. Forward button. And just so you know, I wear the headphones and use that option because I have two dogs who are lovely, but at some point, your voice will make them want to bark. And that is all we will hear, and no one will get to hear your insights, and all they'll think is, wow, if his dogs would just stop. But right. For some reason, they don't mind if I'm talking. So if I have headphones and we can communicate this way, they're going to be okay.
Which reminds me, I'm going to close the door from my dog.
Okay, happy to be there and offer that.
Put my bookcase back up.
All right. And with that, I'll do a little introduction, and this way it can feel like we've started. Hello and welcome to Storytelling with Seth. It is my genuine pleasure to invite Rabbi Harry Manhoff here with us today. And I'm just going to say that I was sent here by his son to make contact. First, it was another employee at their shop, Cape and CowlComics, who told me a little bit about Harry. And then it was his son, Aton, who said, okay, I'll give you his info, but you got to tell him you came from the comic shop. And that's how I'm going to start things off by saying, Harry, thanks for coming on and talking with me today.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm going to say for starters that they had me hooked the moment I mentioned that I've been doing a bit of teaching and using comics just for fun little ways to illustrate a point. And as soon as I did, one of the employees, Kevin, said, oh, you got to talk to Aton's dad. He uses comics in teaching. He's been using it actually in some of his work in the church and in the synagogue and in lessons. And I was like, are you kidding me? And he just started spinning along. And I thought to myself, well, okay, let's have us a good time here. And he goes, yeah, you should follow up with Aton. And I said, okay, next time Aton's working the window, because it's been a COVID situation. So I'm only allowed to walk up to the storefront. And then I finally got the chance to get Aton to, greet me because he was always in the back doing stuff where he wasn't around. So I had the chance to ask him, and he set me up with you. And I was amazed by the fact that he was like, oh yeah, my dad's a huge, he kind of got me into it. And then as I was reading, it was so interesting that your story with comics is pretty amazing. But before I did that research, I wondered which came first, the faith or the comics, or, where was. But I love the idea that when I was reading up about it, it seems like your story starts with a time where your dad was a part owner in a summer camp, and you would be lucky enough to clean up. But despite doing cleanup work, you were also finding these gems like collectible cards and comics,
which my mother did not throw away. She didn't throw away anything. But when in the neighborhood, she became the tutor for all the children that needed some extra work because she's a fifth grade teacher. And so any child that came for a little extra work with her, she would reward with my comic books and my baseball cards. So she didn't throw them away. She gave them to somebody else who now has a multi-million-dollar collection of comic books.
Was there any sort of acknowledgement that this was something that you valued and treasured, or was there simply no argument involved?
No, it was it probably was when I was in college, probably when they were sitting on the floor in my closet. But the fact is that like her, I never threw anything away either. So I just would collect them. I had no idea whether they were any good or not. I put them in the plastic bags and put them in a box in my closet, and had all the only baseball cards I kept were the Yankees. And I had all the Yankees from probably the late 50s until I stopped collecting when I was in college in the 70s. So and she just gave them away. She gave away two statuettes that I had, one of Yogi Berra and one of Mickey Mantle. And when Aton and I and the rest of the family were living down in San Luis Obispo, somebody broke into the card shop, stole the same items, not mine, but two others like it, and then killed the owner of the store because that was the only way he could get away with those two figures. So I figure it's
Wow.
better that it's not in my house.
That is pretty amazing. Oh my goodness. Like, I mean, granted, there's a party that's thinking, wow, that's terrible that these are no longer. Yeah, at the same time, did I really want to be in the path of that, destruction and chaos? Wow. Were there any that you knew, like the moment you came home and you would sort of just be like, there's a disturbance in the force, and you would sort of, go, mom, I feel like you
No,
gave something.
no, probably not, because I would put them in the box, and I don't remember rereading any of the comics. I don't know why I saved them. I just because I saved everything, because she was a pack rat and I was a pack rat, and so I just kept them. And if she gave away one or two or 10 from the pile, I would never have noticed it
Wow.
until there were none left.
Well, I also love the fact that, you mentioned that the giving away process started while you were attending college, because that's also sort of when the collecting period for you stopped for a while, correct?
Right.
Like you had different priorities at that point. And at that point, had you already gone to college with an intention of moving into a seminary-like education, or looking at theology as an approach? Was that already
Yeah,
part of you going in?
that was always part of my plan. Even when I showed up at the draft board, the head of the draft board knew my father and said, "Manhoff, you want to be a rabbi, don't you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, well, I'm going to give you a 4D deferment," which meant would be deferred until I finished divinity school. I didn't even start college yet. So I had 4 years of college and 5 years of divinity school. I was, by the time I got out of the seminary, the war was over.
Understood. Yeah, no, my father actually ended up enlisting because his brother had come back from the previous conflict and said, I'm a mortar man. Like, I can't get any work. He's like, they're probably going to draft you, enlist, get in there, get a trade. At least, if they're going to use you, get something out of it in the process. So that ended up he was a cotton picker from like the age of 4 to
Mm.
18. And yeah, down in the Fresno area, little town called Layton. But that was his sort of like understanding, like, okay, I got two choices: either get scooped up and thrown wherever they want me, or see if I can have any sort of guidance in the direction of what's going on with me. So how early was that sort of something that you planned on doing? I
I
think
think I knew from when I became a bar mitzvah, which was at age 13, and from
okay.
then on, I just knew I was primed in my family to be a doctor. I was the one in the family. My cousin was supposed to be the lawyer, and somebody else was supposed to be the accountant. That's the way it goes in a family like ours.
There was
Uh,
plans.
it was planned, and I got into Yale, and so they just figured I'd be a biochem major and become a doctor. But I can't stand the sight of blood. I can't watch the animal veterinary shows that are on television that my wife and granddaughter love. I can't stand it when the animals are bleeding. It makes me physically ill. So I didn't become a doctor. I have 2 doctorates now, but they still don't let me prescribe medicine. So
One day.
so yes, yeah, I turned
So
down an
from the bar
appointment
mitzvah,
say that again.
you were saying from the time of your bar mitzvah, was there something specific that happened during that time, part of the study, or was it just I don't know, how would you describe it?
Well, it was really, I wanted to be a high school math teacher. My father was a gym teacher and a football coach, and I wanted to teach math. And my father threatened to break both my legs and an arm and disinherit me if I became a high school teacher, because he struggled so much to support the family on a high school teacher's salary.
Mm.
So he didn't want me to have to struggle like that. And so I continue with the idea that I wanted to teach, but I figured if I got to go to rabbinical school and then get a PhD, I could teach. Eventually, I went to rabbinical school. Eventually, I got the PhD, but by then I was a congregational rabbi and never got into the world of academia.
Understood. Yeah, I'm always just intrigued, when that sort of decision gets made, because I feel like in some professions, it has to be something that's understood at a relatively early age. If you want to become a doctor, sometime around your freshman year, you're taking certain courses and doing these AP things. And in the roles that I've had in education, I've been lucky enough to work with that and sort of, understand sort of how steep the trajectory can become for anyone who is aspiring that far. So, knowing, okay, well, that's not going to be my path. I've got a different idea. And how early does that get formed? So then you go to college, you take a break from collecting, you, as you mentioned, become a congregational rabbi, which is there a point that was also sort of determined instead of academia? Was it because life and other directions were
Well,
shaping that?
my junior year in college, I went to Israel. I met a very fine woman who's been my wife for the last 46 years.
Wonderful.
And so we came back to the States, did our senior years on either side of the country, and got married right at the end of the senior year, so that when I entered seminary, we'd be married. So because we were moving to Jerusalem for at least a year. And I just thought that it'd be a good idea to be married to the woman rather than, I found out that a lot of the other students in my class didn't feel the same way, and they came with their girlfriends. But that was, So yes, I came back, did 4 more years of seminary, 2 in Los Angeles, 2 in New York. And while I was in New York, I started studying at Columbia on a Ph.D. And I got all my classwork done, got what they call an MPhil, Masters of Philosophy. And then the job I had in New Jersey kind of fizzled, so I had to find a new job. And the job I found was in California. So I tried to transfer to UCLA, but they didn't see it the way I saw it. It was a 200 mile commute. Didn't work out for me. So then I decided to start again in education. That didn't work out. Then I decided to start a 4th program in religious studies at University of California, Santa Barbara, which was only 100 miles away. So I commuted to Santa Barbara for a couple of years, did my classwork, and wrote in a totally different field. I ended up writing my dissertation about the New Testament because I wanted to write about something that I didn't have a religious commitment to. So where the research took me, that's where I went. So I was in 32nd grade when I got my PhD.
I like the chronology of 32nd grade. That's a good frame of establishment. But then at some point you found that comics were something you were drawn back to. The one of the interviews I read suggests that the impending death of Superman seemed to have played a pivotal moment. Curious how you discovered that. You were reading something or
so in the local paper in San Luis Obispo, the Telegram Tribune, there was a little 1-inch column that said that DC was planning to kill Superman. And I said to Eitan, who was 8 at the time, said, Eitan, they can't kill Superman. Superman is an icon. The world knows Superman. You cannot end Superman. The 3 most recognizable symbols in the world are Superman's S, Batman's bat, and Mickey Mouse's ears. And so they can't kill Superman. So here's what's going to happen. Based on my experience from when I was your age, they're going to kill him off. And then next week, they're going to either say it was a pretend or it was a dream, or they're going to bring him back to life. But whatever it is, he's not going to be dead. And so we went to the store. We bought the Death of Superman. It was the Doomsday issue. And then we realized that there's 3 other Doomsday issues that lead up to it, right? And so we had to get those. And then now I understand. Now I've got to get a hold of the Justice League Doomsday cameo, because that one's the rare one, which now we have about 17 of. And back then it was a little hard to get a hold of. So that began collecting. So he began reading the Funeral for a Friend, which was, now brings in the rest of the DC universe. Meanwhile, the next week, which was supposed to be the next week, was a year later when Superman finally came back to life. By then, we had read all the DC crossovers. we were into Batman and Green Lantern, Flash, and Aquaman. They all were in the and Wonder Woman. So they were all in the crossover, and so we started following them too. And so when they finally brought back Superman in the black costume, we were hooked, and we've been talking about them, and they become part of our family. So we can talk about Clark. Well, he's got his cat's name is Kyle, and I was going to have my children named like that too, but my wife didn't see it that way. But
that's going to happen. There's what you want, and then there's what your partner agrees to.
Right.
Well, that's interesting, because that was such a pivotal thing for me. I was so angry with friends of mine that I was in school with, where we agreed we'd all go together to get the Death of Superman. I'd been reading for a few years before that, but I was like, look, we got to go early. I think collectors are going to really try and swoop this thing up. No, we'll wait till lunch break. I was like, no, we have a break earlier than that. 15 minutes, we can get there and back. And, they're like, no, and, we all got to go together. So we waited till lunch. We got there. It was all cleaned out. None of the issues were available. And I'm looking at them like, I don't know if I can ever trust you guys again, because I'd had everything else. Like, I'd been reading all the ones up to it. I had the funeral for the friend afterwards. And also for me, it really started to sort of change the way I looked at the comics, because I felt so many people had gotten into it for a reason other than what I originally did, which was the colors are gorgeous, the characters are amazing, and everything feels over the top. What I didn't have is your foresight. I thought, what if they don't bring him back? There were all these theories. I was new collecting. I had just gotten into comics. I was raised in a Christian household. Comics were, I was playing with fire. Like, they were pretty sure I was a slippery slope and this was all going to go downhill in a terrible way. And my mom was just like, you can't kill Superman. That's killing hope. Like, it's clearly a sign of the moral decrepitude that the world is undertaking and how bad we've gotten. We're willing to kill off Superman. And I was just like, okay, you guys are putting a lot of pressure on this. I just really love the character. I love the Flash. That was my first introduction. And I knew they brought him back, but I thought killing off Superman was such a big deal that they were talking about a couple of other characters like Valor, who was like, oh yeah, he's as strong as Superman. They could just slot him right in there. And I was really, wow, and then the whole time collecting Funeral for a Friend, there was always the question for me. So yeah, they take a week to do everything. Along the way, they twist up, poor Hal Jordan and Coast City and the Cyborg and all the other people.
Right. And then you have the Reign of Supermen.
Right. Which is now something you can enjoy as an animated feature on DC Infinite. So that brings you in, but it sounds like things didn't just stick with Superman, because as you mentioned, in order to keep up with what was going on, you had to go out and get the Justice League ones. And your whole plan had been, as I understood it, to get the Death of Superman. Next issue is supposed to be Superman comes back to life. You've got the combined collection, and you guys are done. Like you're set. And that as anyone knows about that period in comics, that got blown to smithereens a year later. How heavily invested? Like, how many other titles are you reading besides Superman at that point?
So the other key to the puzzle was that Costco came out with its multi-pack of comic books, and you could buy 20 comic books for $5 or something like that. And so, there were, what did I know? There were 20 comic books, and some of them were Superman and Batman. And so we got those. And then we started filling in runs. And that's how we got into collecting, because I'm a collector. I like to collect things. And so I wanted to do it systematically, which brought us to the first mini Comic-Con in San Luis Obispo at Cal Poly. And then, and it was just a couple of kids from Cal Poly had their comics out on the table. And, and then the next one we went to was in Hayward, which was like, it's a little town here. It's it's not a very with it town. Okay. It's kind of old school. And they had a little comic shop there, but once a year they had at the Veterans Hall, they had a Comic-Con. It was much more established than the one at Cal Poly. And so we started going there and looking for back issues and things like that. And that, of course, led us to San Diego. And we went for most years, for years and years and years.
Yeah, I read that Aton missed a wedding 1 year, and that you have made a practice of not scheduling certain ceremonies during that period because it's like, nope, I know I'm going to be otherwise occupied.
Right. Right. And
What's that window? Oh,
we brought Aton's daughter for her first birthday to Comic-Con. And we have
wow.
pictures of her with all the people in cosplay with a sign saying it's my first birthday. And she was cool. I mean, she's with all these jokers and Chewbacca. Didn't bother her in the least. She just took pictures with everybody. So yeah,
That's
no, we
unbelievable.
don't let anything get in the way.
That sounds so. I'm just curious. What does that window look like when you project each year? When you guys were planning, was it like from this day to this day? Because I gotta get ready to go, and then I gotta recover after I get back. That's at least me when it comes to some things. And like Comic Con, it feels like it's like everything you think you can try and do crammed into a very short period of time, roughly a Thursday to a Sunday night, maybe depending on where
Right.
you're doing and what you're trying to do. And a lot of that is spent in lines. I mean, I knew a guy who would go and he said, look, man, it's not even the cost of other stuff. It's, right now it's like urban camping is what really kills me because of how much I have to camp out for.
Right. Yeah. And that's not the reason I'm there for, is to stand in the lines. Um,
Right.
Aton has been on 2 panels now, and he's been nominated for an Eisner for the top retailer. Um,
I
and
voted for him.
I don't have a vote. So yeah, so we go for that. But we're still nostalgic about the first times we went, when you could walk down the aisles and stop and talk to people. And I got to meet Julie Schwartz there, who was one of the editors of the Superman. And
Yeah, that's awesome.
so I sat down with him one time and talked about the history of Jews in comic books, which is what I started my lecture series on. And he told me all about all the people that he worked with and how he got into it and everything. We became very close. And then every year when it came to Comic-Con, he'd see me or I'd see him, but he'd yell, "Rabbi, come on over!" So he remembered I was a rabbi, and so we'd spend time together. And I have a number. So whenever I would write, he'd write back, and he'd put in a signed baseball card of himself. That they have the DC
Yeah.
artists and things like that. And so I have his. So I have the largest collection of signed Julie Schwartz's of anybody in the world, I'm sure. Um, but that was a prize. I mean, I loved it, and I have 2 copies of his book, and it really helped me get together, get an academic interest into just the fun of doing this.
See, this is why sometimes I think it's great to have like this huge laundry list of questions that I'm just going to like check off. But then other times, as I'm listening to a conversation, I think to myself, I don't even have to bother when you set it up so well like that, because you were just describing talking with Julie Schwartz about what you were doing with your teaching as well as comics. Can you use this opportunity to sort of move us in that direction and talk about where did that come from? I mean, you're collecting, but you started to see the correlations. One, something that I read, just how many people that you can identify at DC who are big and small names that were a huge part of this and part of
Right.
that community. It was almost like a definite place where there was a presence. Tell me a little
I
bit
think
about, crossing
I
those
think every
into.
Jewish kid grows up knowing that Eagle and Schuster were Jewish. It's like knowing Sandy Koufax was Jewish and did pitch on Yom
Okay.
Kippur. So, I knew that there were Jews involved. All you do is see the name Bob Kane, and you know that that's a Jewish name. By the way, it's not his real name, which bothered me about all the Marvel writers. They all changed their names. All the Jewish writers changed their names, but only I'm taking it back. Only Gil Kane changed his name to Kane, maybe in deference to Bob Kane. I don't know, but anyway. So Kane is a very Jewish sounding name. So I began getting interested in the history, and why I asked the question, why were Jews so involved with comic books? Why not regular publishing? So my first theory is that Jews back before World War II were pretty discriminated against, and it would be hard for them to get their books published. So they went into a different kind of writing. But that was completely blown out of the water when all I did was check the names of the publishers back then. And it turns out that Random House and well, let's see, Knopp, Pocket Books, Book of the Month Club, Literary Club, these are all by Jewish businesses. Can't think of the name. Well, anyway, so Brentano is a Jewish name too, and so all these Jews were involved in publishing. So that was not the reason that these young people went into comics. They just, I think it's Jews are in storytelling. That's what I say. The rabbis are just storytellers. We're really just frustrated stand-ups, but other than that, we're storytellers. And so we have a long tradition of stories, telling stories, and some of it influenced some of the characters that you see in the comic books, and some of them did not. But Julie Schwartz felt very strongly that the good guys had to win at the end of the story. I mean, that just had to be that way. And he also felt that Superman should win by outsmarting his enemy, not by beating him up.
I like that strategy.
Yeah,
He's got the physical tools, but it's the ability to apply them with a cognitive awareness.
Right. So, I started making references on the pulpit to some of the comic books I was reading at any given time, and it didn't matter because they rolled their eyes at anything I said from the pulpit, whether it was politics or I could do a serious sermon every once in a while, but they fall asleep. So you got to do something to keep them awake. No, there's always a positive lesson in the DC comics. It's not the indie dark, sometimes, the vampire wins, it's just, that's not the way it's supposed to be. So, so it's easy to do. One of the lessons that I do most often, and I've been doing it for many years, is when I'm teaching, I teach at St. Mary's College, very, very part-time. And when I'm trying to explain to the students the first century and why Jewish people followed Jesus and why other Jewish people did not, I say, there's two guys out in the desert and they're forming armies. They're gonna challenge Rome, the strongest army in the world. Okay, there's two generals out there, and if you go join one of those generals, you're putting your life in his hands. Now, one of these generals can fly, and he shoots beams out of his eyes, and he's so super strong he probably could beat the Romans up all by himself. And the other guy, super smart, he's got all the best weapons, he's taught people how to fight, and then I say to my students, who are you going to join, right? Are you going to go to? And then I ask them who they've obviously figured out Superman and Batman, and I say to them, why would you go to Superman? Why would you go to Batman? And then finally, when it's my turn, I would say to them, well, back in the first century, there were some people who thought that the Messiah was going to be divine and that he could fly and he could beat up the Romans all by himself. And there were others who thought that the Messiah was going to be a great general who was going to organize the armies. That was Bar Kokhba in the 2nd century. And so if I had to choose between the two, I'd probably go to Batman, because even though Superman's a part of my house and a part of my life and everything, I'm not really sure a man can fly. Okay, so that's the story, and that's a lesson for the students to think about. What's the difference between a Messiah that can do everything almost magically, and one that has to be human, and the Jewish tradition had both.
And I think I love the idea of describing that, especially representing it between the two. One, because I also came across the fact that you've collected issues for both of those characters, and it doesn't sound like you've missed any in in the time since you got into collecting.
So when we started collecting, well, from the time we began collecting when Ethan was 8 until he opened his store, we were building up our Batman and Superman collections. And we had 40 years worth of Superman titles and 35 years of Batman titles. And that meant all of them.
That's impressive.
At that point, it was getting to be a lot more expensive to fill in the runs than it was at the beginning when we'd go and we'd do the quarter boxes, and we'd go, yeah, they're probably too young, but there was a time when there were quarter boxes. Now the quarter boxes are $1, but but the fact was is we would sit there on the floor and just keep going through them until we looked on our list and saw whether we needed it or didn't need it. And then of course, I mean, Eitan can recognize a cover of a comic book that he's seen once, but I can't. I had a eidetic memory at one point, but it's not that way anymore because I'm getting old. Anyway, inevitably, I would buy 2 or 3 of the same issue that we were looking for. It'd be on my list of what I was looking for, and I'd forget to cross it off. So I'd get it twice more. But we had a good time at Comic-Con. And again, those were the days when you could stand in line for 15 minutes and get up to the DC desk, and somebody would draw a picture for you in your book, in your scrapbook. And so we have a lot of original art from those days. Of course, it's not worth anything because it's not authenticated. But one of our favorites was we went down to Santa Barbara, where Bruce Timm and who was the other? Anyway, they're there, and what do we know? So Eitan asks Bruce Timm to draw a Batman for him. So he draws this Batman, and he says he's never done that before. He's written it, but he's never drawn it. And so we might have the only Bruce Timm Batman ever drawn, framed in the store.
Wow. And then to know that that's the guy who went on to create such a legacy with his animated series running from Batman on.
Yep. Somebody is getting your attention. Okay.
One of the joys of sharing space, there's always the possibility that you're gonna block out some time for something and someone's gonna need you. But I think one of the things that catches my attention is you're offering up a couple of different ideas to your students initially. So time for a little secret. I also share space with my mother-in-law. We're all moving around at different times. And that was setting the dogs off just a moment ago. So I had to at least mute it so you didn't have to listen to them while they were getting excited. Like, hey, wait a minute, Gmod's coming down and, we've got stuff to talk about, guys. So you're doing this investing, and at some point it sounds like there was that recognition that if you've got extras of things, maybe other people would want them. Maybe there's an opportunity to let them go, or do you still have doubles and triples of certain issues?
So, at one point we had 20,000 comic books in the extra bedroom in my house.
Wow.
So we bought a 4-bedroom house in Castro Valley. One was for the comic books. One was for all my other books, because I do research in other fields. So my wife said, well, now we have a 2-bedroom house with 2 walk-in closets.
Wow.
So we had these big racks going all the way around one of the rooms, and they were all filled with boxes, long boxes of comic books. And we would periodically add in the new comics from the previous month or 2 months or whatever, and we put them in all in alphabetical order by collection, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've always told Eitan he had to get it out of my house because I couldn't stay in my house forever. And then, so when we moved to Berkeley and he moved out to El Cerrito and he finally opened the store, I said, here, now you have a backstock. So I donated it to the store. I mean, it was,
wow.
It was, for me, it's the pleasure of collecting. It wasn't, I wasn't trying to make money on it. Now he's doing okay on it, some of them, but we had a lot of junk. But you see, you can see that I'm already working again. And I've got racks full of books that I have to now go through and catalog and put into the system. That's what I do. I like putting things in order. That's what I like doing.
Man, what a gift. What an amazing gift to say, here, you're launching a story. Here's a backstock. I'm just going to, donate to the cause.
And we also collected all the figurines. I mean, we had all the Batman black and whites
I
and
can see some statues in the back there, right over your head.
right. Those are the ones that I kept for myself. But we had 100 of them or so, and that also went into the store because, as I say, I wasn't doing it for money. I was just doing it for collecting and having a good time with Aton.
Yeah, I mean, I love going into the shop and seeing just all the great stuff that, I mean, you love to look at the walls and see these things and you're like, would I ever, you know, but just to have it and to know you've got it just sitting there, and some of the figurines are absolutely gorgeous. Do you have any, I mean, the ones that you've kept, clearly they're ones you liked, wanted to hold on to, hold a special place. Is there a one or a top three that sort of shines above the all, where you're like, yeah, that's the one I think about the most? Or like, if I could save a couple of them and something was happening, these would definitely be the ones.
So when I left my first congregation in San Luis Obispo, I was kind of moping around, and I went into a Hallmark store, and they had a Superman figurine with Superman with the chains breaking across his chest. They're not part of the DC Direct. It was a Hallmark thing, and so I was treating myself to retail therapy, and he's still in my case behind me. He goes with me wherever I go. And the new ones are just so much more spectacular than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that every time I see the new ones, I want them. The one that I is it up there? Do I have the motorcycle up there? No. Where is she? Anyway, I have the Catwoman motorcycle DC Direct one.
Ooh,
That one
nice.
is one of my favorites.
Very
And
classy.
yeah, it's really good. And then also Aton has in the store a Legos Cape and Cowl Cafe from this superheroes, the kids. So I put that together one time on one of the special days that we were having, and put it in the case with all the black and whites.
That's awesome. I love the idea of, I mean, whenever I see those statues, it's a little difficult because then I look at the price tags and I'm just kind of like, okay, I don't know how I can, but you see guys like Todd McFarlane who've come along and just changed how detailed and impressive those statues have become, along with so many others. And you're just kind of like, okay, I mean, I want it. I don't know if I can afford it, but I want it.
Well, if you did an occasional funeral or wedding, you'd have a couple extra dollars to buy things, to buy toys. So and
Note to self.
that's what Mike knew at the Crush in Castro Valley, that if I had a wedding or a funeral, I'd be into the store to pick up some of the figures.
Nice.
So
Okay.
with disposable income.
Yeah. Hey, I also love the fact, though, that even though, you're not looking at collecting as being something that offers a financial return, I also got a kick out of something I discovered in one of the stories, which was you chose to invest kind of, I don't know how close to equally, but pretty equally in both Marvel as well as Warner Brothers at an interesting time that ended up reaping some impressive results.
Right.
I'd love to hear
So
that story from you.
so that's Aton wanted to buy the signed copy of the Rebirth of Superman. So we have it with all the DC writers and everything. It's one of those really special ones. Oh, wait a minute. So he also has one that's signed by just Jerry Siegel. One of the Return of Superman was signed by Jerry Siegel before he passed away. And so
Wow.
he was 13. This was years ago. And so and he was working at this store. I mean, he's not old, and he's 13 years old, and he's working at the comic book store. They can't pay him because he's too young to get paid. So they're giving him credit, and then I give him the money for the credit, and then he'd go buy, he'd go get the books for us. And so he actually was making the money that he had the credit for. So, so he collected some money, and he decided he's going to spend $300 for that signed Superman. And then we heard that Marvel was being sold, and it was it $10 an issue, a share. So we decided we'd buy $300 worth of that as well. $300 for the comic book, $300 of Marvel. And since we didn't really read Marvel, back then we didn't, we had to get the Warner Brothers, which was $30 a share. And so we got 10 shares of Warner Brothers. So the Marvel stock eventually went bust. The Warner Brothers got bought by AOL and then by Time Warner and then et cetera. So that one bought him a car in high school, an old broken down T-Bird, T-Bird with the port windows and everything. It was an old fire engine red. We had, every once in a while, he'd have to call me and I'd have to come and jump it when he was out on a date or something.
Of course. It's the only time that happens.
But meanwhile, the comic book is worth more than that stock was, and worth clearly more than the Marvel stock, which went bankrupt. So, so the comic book did well, and we still have that.
That's amazing. So I love the fact that whenever somebody's life has these interwoven pieces where it's like comics and the stories about them and this sort of passion for it just keeps connecting in different ways. I mean, for starters, you know, the fact that you were able to actually, like, you know, hang out on a fairly annual basis, it sounds like, with Julie Schwartz, that you were able to, you know, get this amazing signed copy of Superman Returns that, you know, a little bit of playing around with some stocks on your favorites. One goes bust, one goes over the top.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. So then I'm also curious, you know, what has the interweaving been like as far as, you know, your instruction using this in the classroom, talking about comics? Because, you know, I'm sure you're able to make some examples when you first started using the ideas, but the more you study anything, the more you just sort of like branch out your knowledge. It's really interesting how you find that so many other things you might not have considered they become part of this discussion simply because what you discover along the way. I love exploration. I love discovery for those reasons. What have you been discovering about using comics in your instruction and the changes from when you first started doing it to where you find yourself now, or what some of the significant moments might have been?
That's an interesting question. One of the best things that worked out for me was the histories of the Jewish people by Stan Mack, and the book called Homeland, which was done by Marv Wilson, which is about the history of Israel. And there are pictures in there that look like could be photographs. They're drawn so magnificently, and they cover the history for 2,000 years. So that's a marvelous teaching tool for my class, where I teach Jewish history through literature. And so when a student has a little bit of trouble, keeping up or following what I'm saying, because I won't talk around in circles like any other rabbi, so I recommend that they get those books, and they find them to be very helpful. So I use them that way. One of them that I'm using, I used it actually at a book club with Eitan at the store, but also I've used it at synagogue groups, is the issue, the God Damned, which is about Cain, the story of Cain. Right. And one of Eitan's customers came in and said, "I've always wanted to say this, so where's the goddamn comic book?" So anyway, it's the story of Cain, and it goes from Cain all the way to Noah. And I've always, as a kid even, was upset with the story of Noah. I mean, it's nice with all the animals and Noah, but what about all the people who got left behind and drowned? So I was pretty upset with that. And I've been dealing with that for a long time. And I started dealing with the idea that's just mentioned in offhanded between the two stories, between Adam and Eve and Noah, that the sons of God mated with the daughters of man, and they produce monsters. This is in chapter 5 or 6 of Genesis. I mean, and there's no more. That's the end of the story. But then I begin thinking that, and there was a tradition that said that there was a straight line from Adam to Noah, that line had to be pure, and that's why they mentioned the whole line in the Bible. So
Right.
all the things outside of that are not human. They're beings, but they're not human. They're monsters.
Right.
And so that I came to that conclusion, and then Goddamn came out and started to draw pictures of it. And for the first time, I could see what I had been imagining academically in my head. I could see drawn out in very vivid detail. The monsters are monsters. They eat other people, and and they drive around, whatever. The part Flintstone, part EC Comics, and so we what I do is I like to show that the storyline in the Bible is illustrated here in ways that I never imagined, even though I was doing research in the same field. So I like that. That lesson was one of my favorites, and I'm going to do it again on our holiday coming up next month, where we study all night long for the holiday. So we have a big community-wide study session.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like, with this story, you were able to, show for them and for many of those that you're trying to like illustrate this idea of here, there's what we think we sort of, hear or read when we're looking at this in text. And then here's another idea where it's actually drawn out, where the imagination is captured by somebody else and shown to you in a way it's interesting in that way, that it's sometimes harder to look away from things when they're pictures. You can see a word or you can see a sentence printed and you can read it and you can somehow like make a decision about it. But when you see a picture, if it hits you the right way, if it makes the impact in that moment, even if you look away, do you ever really forget?
Probably not for that one. I still have nightmares about that one. And that was a while ago. The other thing one other thing is, the other thing I like to teach is the process of thinking that goes behind a lot of these things. I like to teach critical thinking. And a couple of years ago, there was a series of split Superman in the golden era and in the current times. And so in the golden era, he goes and fights against the Nazis, which he only did once, I think, in the actual during the war. But because the Hitler had the Spear of Destiny, if you remember.
Oh yeah, that was the whole thing where he could keep all the superheroes out.
Right. So there's one issue, and it's in the Warsaw Ghetto, and all the characters are named Moshe and Yassel, and I mean, they have very clear Miriam, very clear Jewish, even Yiddish names from the ghetto. And there was an article in the San Francisco Chronicle that was complaining that DC did not use the word Jew in these issues, where the characters were clearly Jewish. Anybody who knew anything about them knew that they were Jewish. And I didn't really understand what the problem was. So I started making copies of the comic book to discuss it with my students and see if they could see anything wrong with that, if they felt as though the Jews were not portrayed fairly, or that they were being ignored, or that it wasn't a Jewish story. So that's the kind of thing I like to do with them, to make them think critically about the storylines.
I like that idea also because it presents a question that doesn't have a clear yes and no, right or wrong. So many times when I was taking writing courses, I remember one of the great things is they would say, think about an emotion and then write about the emotion, but don't say what it is. So think about someone you love or think about someone you hate, but don't use those words specifically. Try and write, and you could exude that idea through the expressions around it. And yet that was an exercise. And it sounds like this is a similar exercise in which you're using names that point to a clear history and culture. You're using other elements that do, but you're not actually stating explicitly. And then you're leaving that question to your students is saying, okay, so, this isn't a right or wrong, but where do you fall on this and why? Where is it that this presentation makes a difference for you? That's a really great, wow. I'm going to have to check that out now.
When I begin teaching my class, I tell them that if they ever ask me an either or question, is it this or is it this? My answer is usually going to be yes. It could be either, and that's why you're asking the question, because both of them make sense to you in some way. And so we have a tradition there's a very famous tradition about two men who go to the rabbi and they're complaining about each other. And the first one tells his side of the story, and the rabbi says, "You're right." And the second guy says, "Wait a minute, you haven't even heard my side of the story." So he tells his side of the story, completely the opposite side of the story. And the rabbi looks at him and says, "You're right too." And then the rabbi's spouse comes to the door and says, "I've been listening in. They're saying the complete opposite things. They can't both be right." And the rabbi says to him or her, "You're right too." So in my class, you can't say something that's wrong. It may not be the answer I'm looking for, but it can't be wrong.
Right.
And that's where I think Jewish thinking goes. We always talk about what are all the possibilities, and
What do you
that's what I
think
like.
about some of the some of those who are deemed the masters of the craft, who have really sort of imprinted, not only who they are, but uh, a recognition that if you're reading a work by, um, well, let's go ahead and just go with Eisner. The whole concept behind a couple of his stories. I recently had a chat with a great guy about Contract with God, and with another friend of mine, we ended up doing Life on Other Planets, Signal from Space. And with both of those, I was really impressed, just how clear his intention was about everything from the words to what the pictures are designed to show you. And one of my guests that I was talking with when we were describing Contract with God, he was just like, no one does this. Like, no one does what Eisner does. It's like every time he draws a page, it's a different style. And it's a style that's meant to capture that moment and that intention. And I feel like when you talk about, I mean, for one, there's an award named after him, which, up until his passing, he was there in person, like, "Hi, I'm here to give this to you."
Right.
But his name, I think, is synonymous with excellence. I think, as far as, I mean, so many of his works are seminal. So much of what he did, from a basic comic strip to defining the graphic novel. How does that fold into the conversation that you're having with your students?
So I don't know that his name will. Well, actually, that's not true, because next week I'll be doing. I'm in the last week of the course, and it's American Jewish history. And so one of the things I point out is that Jews went into industries that were wide open because nice people didn't do that. And that's the reason Jews went into comic books, not because they couldn't get published, but because comic books were bad for you, and were, they were disruptive to society or whatever, and so that left it wide open for a group of kids that were storytellers, and so that's how they got involved. And so it was very natural for Eisner and a couple his generation to tell stories. I mean, that's just what we do. Eitan insists, by the way, that I'm the only person he knows that reads comic books but doesn't look at the pictures. so,
Really?
so I'm more interested in character development, the story, the plot line, and the words. That's my field, the study of words. And so I'm not really that aware of the artists, but I am more aware of the writers, and especially people like Eisner, and the Kubricks also did some very important Jewish work uh, in their lives. A lot of it's Holocaust stuff, because that's very dramatic, and so Joe Kubik did one called Yussel, which is a Yiddish name for Joseph. So that's interesting. And it's about a young man in the ghetto, again in the Warsaw Ghetto, who was documenting what was going on in the ghetto with the Nazis and the Jews through pictures. and
Understood.
and that's the premise of the book. And so he gets picked up by the Nazis, and he starts drawing pictures of them, and they like it, so they let him go. And so that's the fantastical part of it. But the storyline of how Jews kept records of everything, and they hid the records and then went back and found them long after the war, is part of our history too. So yeah, all I can keep saying is that we tell stories. I mean, it just makes sense.
Yeah, that reminds me, I was lucky enough to be a TA in a class, and one of the books that we were teaching was MAHL by Spiegelman. And that was just like a really amazing story, telling the narrative not only from the perspective of the son, but also through the stories that his father would tell him, and also, presenting it in such an interesting choice, with personification of animals, which animals you choose, mice, cats, and also just through that, it seemed like there was almost like a descriptive freedom that also felt so jarring when suddenly you would have these very violent stories or these very tragic stories, and you're looking at these sweet characters, and it just changed the way that you thought you understood history, because this was another telling, another story. And I think what I love about stories, and why I'll keep doing this as long as I can, always make it something that I'm doing, is what does it mean when a new story shows you a whole new perspective on something you thought you understood? You find yourself reading things and you like them, and you read more about them, and you feel like you might have a better understanding, a growing and even deepener. And then someone comes along, they go, no, here's this other thing you didn't think about. And you're like, and it fits. It's just now you almost have to widen your that much even further.
Of course. Well, if I ever finish my storytelling, I'll let you know. But I've been writing a novel based on my dissertation, because nobody can read a dissertation. It's in dissertationese, which is a language that's only understood by academics. So I took the ideas that I learned from the New Testament. I'm writing a book about two Jewish people looking for Jesus, because they want him to heal one of their sisters. And they're always one town behind him. They never catch up to him. And so when they get to the town, somebody tells them what Jesus did. I take that directly from the Gospel of Matthew. And then somebody else says, no, you're thinking about somebody else from the Jewish tradition who has the same traditions behind them that are told about Jesus. So it's really comparative religion, but it can be a lot of fun. It can be a lot of fun.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, I can picture it now. So this is where I have fun, because when you were saying you're the only person who reads comics for the words, I do similarly. And for me, what always caught my attention was when I would look at a panel and think to myself, how do you write that in a script? Once I became aware of the scripts, and recently I've been lucky enough to do an online comic strip, and it's fun because I get to see it, presented after the artist interprets. But along the way, I would catch myself in these moments where I'm like, I have to describe something for someone that I think I want to happen, and I want it to look this way. And then I imagine all those times I saw someone pull it off in a beautiful comic book, and I'm like, how do I get from there to here? How do I? Because when it comes to the language of the script, I'll laugh when sometimes someone will make fun of like Tom King, who's a very well regarded, and someone will put something like Batman beats up bad guys, and Tom King's like, you totally have it. The next line should be Batman stares, Batman does this, but and the rest of it's just the artist. Where I'm looking at the picture and I'm going, no, there's got to be other times where you tell something that allows them to frame it in a certain way. And it becomes such an interesting discovery to, sort of use your imagination in that way.
Yeah, I've played around with screenplays. I've never really finished any of them, but I have a good imagination. So I like to create ideas and make them, start them out at least. But I want to tell you one scene from my book that you'll get a kick out of. You know the scene of the demoniac across the Galilee. He's living in the cemetery, and then Jesus chases the demons out of him into a herd of pigs.
Yes.
And the pigs go flying off the mountain into the sea. Right.
Right.
So I have that chapter being told by the pig herders. They're very upset with this guy. He ruined their lives, and so that's how I tell it. Yeah, it's supposed to be kind of tongue in cheek, but it covers everything.
No, that's such a great. It reminds me. I feel like it was in the '90s that at one point, like Time or Life hired a few writers and asked them to take moments from the Bible and retell them with sort of like a modern lens. And it was such a moment. Again, good Christian kid as much as I thought I was, but clearly sheltered. Like reading this and being like, is this sacrilege? And yet at the same time, I'm reading it and it's showing me things I never considered. Like it suggests the idea of like Jesus sees every once in a while a disciple like take a woman off by themselves for a bit of consulting or something like that. And these other ideas where I'm like, no one said that these disciples were inhuman or above, superior. In fact, in many times they're being, called out for their faults by Jesus as part of a lesson. So who knows how far that could expand it. It really just sort of broadened the idea. And I love that with your story, what you would be doing is, one, reenacting that tradition of storytelling you were describing by having each setting, each new town be a set of stories that those on the journey are encountering as they're trying to catch up with someone. But also this idea of, through it, that comparative process of, so when they were doing Council of Nicene, they're selecting the books. At what point were they going, yeah, this perspective, no, sorry. There's those legendary stories you hear about Jesus as a teenager, all these different other things where it's like, nope, Apocrypha, toss it over there. It's not to be included. And as they're reading your novel, I can imagine someone going, that sounds an awful like that thing I heard once before. And then other ones where they're like, why didn't they include that? I would have read the Bible if they had good stories like that. So
I don't want to be offensive to anybody. I have a lot of respect for the writing and things like that. And so I treat it with great respect, but there's humorous moments. I mean, and there's serious moments too, because whenever you go to a town where Jesus has been, there's the trail of destruction from all the people that were there. Think about the wall outside of Peter's mother's house. People are standing on the wall trying to get in. The wall is gone by the time my characters get there, and so they know that Jesus has been there. Because the boats are sunk and the wall is knocked down and there's a big hole in the roof. Yep, he's been here. So
the signs were everywhere.
Yeah.
That would be when you finish that, come on back. That would be awesome. Now, I wanted to point out something that I also uncovered, which was the fact that you still collect up to almost 1,000 books a year. Are you still drawn to the things that you were drawn to when you were first collecting? What has your evolution been like? Are you strictly DC only? Is that the only stories you find yourself, or are there some independents, or are you thinking about them as much scholarly as you are about entertainment and engagement? I'm curious.
It's on insist that I read certain things. But I have a full academic schedule and writing schedule. I really don't have as much time as I would like to read comics. Now that I'm retired, I don't have time for anything. I've become just incredibly busy. I'm giving a lesson tomorrow morning, and I've been working on it for 3-4 weeks now. And I've done so much research on it that I can use maybe 5% of the research that I've done. And I know that I'm only going to use 5%. That doesn't stop me from continuing to do the research because I just love researching. So, but now I have more time for it, and then I don't have time for what I'm supposed to do.
Does he ever land you with a real winner where you're like, okay, buddy, you got me. I was able to read that one, and okay, that changed my thinking. Do any stick out that sort of when you think about like, hey, that was one he picked for me that I gave a read, or he hit the nail.
Yeah, he does that often. But there was the one about the football coach, Southern what? I can't remember what it's about. A probably Texas team, and the coach is probably evil, and the assistant coach is. But it's really about people down south and their attitude to football. And my father being a football coach, my brother being a football coach. I'm the black sheep of the family. That I didn't.
I wasn't aware your brother was a football coach too.
Yeah. And not only was he a football coach, he was a football coach at Grambling before he went on to coach in other schools. So that's our family tradition. So that one really touched home. I read Boys with him until I just couldn't stand it anymore. And then when the boys came out again, Dear Becky, I actually like that because there's more storytelling than the blood and great, all the gruesomeness of it. So he's a phenomenal rabbi. He's phenomenal writer. Why the Last Man? I read every issue when it came out. Definitely got hooked on that.
Yeah.
Somebody will recommend something to me, and then if it's just strikes the right chord, I'll go after it. We went to a comic book store in Tahoe, and the guy notices that I'm wearing a yarmulke, and he says, "I have a comic book that I think you'll enjoy." And he reaches in and he gets the 6 back issues of Ragman, probably from, I don't know, the 80s. I don't know when it's exactly from,
Yeah,
but
late
and,
80s, early 90s, something like that, I think.
and it was, yes, it was fabulous. It's a story about an Irish kid whose father is Jewish. He didn't know his father was the ragman. He becomes the ragman, and it becomes a superhero in the ghetto, um, whose weakness is fire because of the rags, right? The rags
Right,
could catch on fire.
right.
It was a great story, and I loved it. I think it was a DC book. It is a DC book. I mean,
It is. He's a great character. I mean, and the thing that I love about the concept behind the rags is each patch is a soul, and
right,
each one can lend him something that he needs in that moment and earn so much time off of their penance and achieve a form of redemption at some point. Uh,
right. So that's the modern iteration, but the original iteration was that he was a golem. The golem was a clay man. This is a lot of people think the Superman is based on the golem. The golem was a clay man brought to life by the rabbis, and he could fly, and he could see through walls, and he could walk through walls, and his job was to guard the ghetto from all sorts of mischief. And but he also didn't have a mind of his own, so whatever he was told to do, like Mickey, the sorcerer's apprentice, if you
right.
just tell him what to do, he just kept doing it and doing it and doing it. The story about the well in Mickey Mouse movie comes from the golem stories, because that's what he does. He brings the water from the well till he just,
Right.
the whole house is full of water. Um, so the takeoff on that was that now you have this golem. It's not made of clay anymore. It's made of rags.
Mm.
And the story behind it is that the father, Rory's father, never told Rory about it because he was embarrassed, because he didn't stay to fight through the very last minute when the ghetto was burning. That he left, but he'd done part of it, but then he was just embarrassed by that. So that's that. And I also have all the Thing stuff. I have a lot of stuff from the Thing, his bar
Really?
mitzvah. Yeah, I like. I still collect, especially the Jewish stories that are in comic books that I can find that are specifically Jewish. And they can't. Batwoman, as you might have seen or not seen, had a Jewish funeral.
Yes.
And 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 Batman, when he goes back to Alfred Pennyworth's grave, he leaves a pebble on the grave. We don't bring flowers to graves. We save that money for charity. And we take a rock and put it there to let people know that we were there.
Hmm.
And so Bruce Wayne puts a pebble on Pennyworth. Now, Alfred Pennyworth is not Jewish, but Bruce Wayne's first cousin,
Right.
Cain, you go back to this Jewish name, Cain,
Right.
okay, who's a very Jewish character, right? Batwoman is very Jewish. There's menorahs in the pictures and everything like that. Her father is Jewish, right? And her father is Martha Wayne's brother.
Right.
That means that Martha Kane is Jewish. By Jewish law, anybody who's born to a Jewish mother is Jewish. So now we have a Jewish Batman.
It reminds me too, when they reintroduced Batwoman, one of the other elements behind her story was that there was that Book of Cain that they were working in, and later they changed the narrative and everything, got switched back up again. But I
Right.
do remember when she popped back on, that was one of the other elements where I was like, Book of Cain, where did this come from? Like, hey, DC, what's going on, guys? You're really building a mythology here and pulling this these pieces together. I was really caught by that, but I did not make that connection that you just did for me, where I'm like, that's right, actually.
Because you don't read Jewish magazines too. You have to read Jewish magazines which said that DC made a mistake and it made Batman Jewish by mistake.
I did not read that magazine. I will have to find that now. However way I have to, hook or crook, I will find a way. Look, I made a promise to you that we would keep, in mind the fact that being retired, you have absolutely no time to yourself. You're able to squeeze me in between appointments. But I'm always interested in the fact that I like to think I have an idea when I'm presenting an interview and I'm asking questions. But just like we were talking about, there's all these different ways I haven't considered. I loved when you were talking about so many different writers at the time going into comic books. I had a teacher who told me that, if you look at most of the Westerns, that they were also written by Jewish writers. And he's like, actually, they were Easterners. They were these stories about living in places like Eastern Europe and having these conflicts. And then they just took those stories, they brought them over here. And his theory was they basically turned the cowboys, which in his mind were the bums of the West, into heroes through these Easterner stories, as he would describe them. And that was just a perspective where I was like, never thought of it that way. Now I'm, hearing you describing this idea of, moving into comic books. So I always think about this, the question I didn't ask, the perspective I didn't consider. And when you're talking with people about comics, about using them in discussions about faith, and someone like me is asking you questions, do you ever find yourself going, he almost asked the right question. He was so close. If he would have just asked this question, the answer I had ready for. So I love to ask, did I miss a question that you could have shared something? Or is there something you're always waiting for somebody to ask that question? So you go, been waiting for that. Boy, do I have an answer for you. Because it's possible.
I will think of it tomorrow, but not right now. I'm not that quick. I love the questions that you asked, and I had a great time just talking with you. And
Harry, I really appreciate that.
So I will get back in touch with you when I finish my book after 15 years. I promise.
Hey, that would be awesome. I would love to have you back on. I always like to also let anyone who comes on know that somebody listening or watching, because I'll also put this on YouTube at some point, might think, man, I would love to follow up with that guy about some of the stuff he talked about. I would love to follow up with that person and ask questions. And if you have a method that you like to communicate the most, I'd love to give you an opportunity to let anybody listening or watching know, hey, this is a way you can reach me if you want to keep talking about any of the things I brought up, or books, that you can get into, or anything else. How can people reach out and make contact with you if they're not in your class already?
I guess the easiest way is through email. I'm
Okay.
not very good with a lot of the other methods. And the
That's
email is
okay.
pretty easy. It's harry.manhoff@gmail. And all you have to do is remember that it's Hoffman inside out. Manhoff is Hoffman inside out.
Hey.
So it's got an extra H in it that some people might miss. So it's harry.manhoff. I'd love to talk to anybody. Gosh, anybody will let me talk, I'll talk.
Well, I've enjoyed every minute of it. I'm going to stop the recording so we can stop being so polite and official and everything, and just wrap up off screen. And hey, I love whenever I'm having a conversation and it's ending with a laugh. So Harry, thanks for a great conversation and lots of great laughs. Really.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of a really great conversation with Harry Manhoff. I loved hearing the story of his introduction to comics, that plan to just buy one Superman comic and then the one after it, how a year later he and Eitan were suddenly collectors, and so many possibilities for the future, including his impending internship at Cape and CowlComics. Did I miss something? Did we? Love to hear your questions or comments. Please don't hesitate to send a message to me or Harry. We have all the ways for you to do that available in the notes, and I look forward to the chance when I get to share another great conversation with you. If you like what you heard, tell a friend.